Thank you, Austin. It is easier to venerate prophets than to heed their lessons. And today I raise up a Unitarian prophet from the 19th century, Theodore Parker. He died in 1860 as the nation was torn into civil war. What possible relevance does he have to us today? We currently live in a nation that is divided into blue and red states. This difference is overstated by the Electoral College, and it's amplified by the media, who uses the division and rancor to sell advertising. But there does indeed seem to be a deep division in how people perceive our nation. There's humorous talk about the blue states seceding and joining Canada, but there is more serious talk about our nation slipping into fascism. David Lohr, a UU minister in Austin, Texas, writes, "Our current descent into fascism came about through a kind of perfect storm. The first stream of thought was the imperialistic dream of the project for a new American century. I don't believe anyone can understand the past 4 years without reading the Project for a New American Century, published in 2000 and authored by many who have been prominent players in the current administration. This report saw the fall of communism as a call to America to become the military rulers of the world. It spelled out the military enhancements we would need, and noted sadly that these wonderful plans would take a long time unless there could be a catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. In this report, there was no clear interest in religion. But a second powerful stream must be credited to Pat Robertson and the Christian Reconstructionists or Dominionists, long dismissed by most of us as screwball. The Dominionist style of Christianity, which he has been preaching since the early 1980s, is now the most powerful religious impulse in America. He is clear that women must remain homebound and obedient servants of men, and that abortions like homosexuals should not be allowed. Robertson has also been clear that other kinds of Christians, including Episcopalians and Presbyterians, are enemies of Christ. The third major component of this perfect storm has been the desire of very wealthy Americans and corporate CEOs for a plutocracy and to reduce our nation to a social Darwinism. These are dire things, and I know that many of you have read this sermon because that seems to be the only email that has been getting through to me. I have received this sermon from about 20 sources. So there definitely is something that this sermon resonates with people, and I think it resonates with our fear that maybe indeed we are on the cusp of, if not a civil war, a kind of social divide that is very disturbing, because we do not like to be at odds with our neighbors. Looking at this time that we're in, it may be helpful to look back to the time of Theodore Parker, the time before we had our Civil War. Parker was a transcendentalist who was the most popular preacher in Boston in the 1840s and 1850s. He was at the 28th Unitarian Church, so he didn't have a big pulpit. He had to rent out halls to hold as many as 2,600 people who would come to hear him preach. He preached in the evening so that a lot of times the people who would go to the more established churches could have a chance to come and hear him preach. But his abolitionist views alienated him from other Unitarian ministers. The established churches had owners of textile mills who were complicit in the slave trade, and they didn't like to be reminded of that. Parker hid fugitive slaves in his church and urged Boston to resist the Fugitive Slave Law, which was signed into law by Millard Fillmore, who also happened to be Unitarian. We prefer to recall our UU history as a constant expansion of human freedom, but then, as now, there are diverse opinions on how we should proceed. Sunday morning is a time for high ideals of love and justice, but the rest of our lives we struggle to enact these ideals and make them real. We hear a lot of high talk about moral values these days, rooted in a selective fundamentalism, a strict adherence to those scriptures that reinforce bigotry, and a convenient forgetting of the passages of mercy. Christianity today is faced with the struggle to define itself. And it was the same in Parker's day, mostly to blame Parker for that, and the Transcendentalist movement. And also the entering of German scholarship into looking at the Bible as literature rather than as an idol. In 1841, Parker delivered a sermon on the transient and permanent in Christianity. He said, "It must be confessed, though with sorrow, that transient things form a great part of what is commonly taught as religion. An undue place has often been assigned to forms and doctrines, while too little stress has been laid on the divine life of the soul, love to God and love to man. Religious forms may be useful and beautiful. They are so whenever they speak to the soul and answer a want thereof. In our present state, some forms are perhaps necessary, but they are only the accident of Christianity, not its substance. Now, the solar system, as it exists, is in fact permanent, though the notions of Thales, Ptolemy, Copernicus, and Descartes about this system prove transient, imperfect approximations to the true expression. So the Christianity of Jesus is permanent, though what passes for Christianity with popes and catechisms and sects and churches in the 1st century or in the 19th century prove transient also. Parker challenged the notion of divine inspiration of the Old and New Testaments. Matters have come to pass that even now he is deemed an infidel, if not by implication an atheist, whose reverence for the Most High forbids him to believe that God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son, a thought at which the flesh creeps with horror. To believe it solely on the authority of an Oriental story written down nobody knows when by whom or for what purpose, which may be a poem but cannot be a record of fact unless God is the author of confusion and a lie. But modern criticism is fast breaking to pieces this idol which men have made of the Scripture. Well, I think Parker was a bit optimistic there. I do not think this idol has been broken as fast as he thought. In fact, in recent years, I think this idol has been gathered up from the ground and superglued together. the false claims of biblical inerrancy set up a barrier to the love that Jesus taught. Through Parker's influence, our tradition came to de-emphasize the letter of Scripture. So much to the point that this generation of Unitarian Universalists does not know how to even talk to those who worship the Bible. The love that Jesus taught is bigger than the book that tries to convey it. But we need to stay familiar with the Bible. We need to speak the language of the majority in order to communicate. Some abuse the Bible by exploiting the bad parts. That does not mean that we should forget the good parts. We need to have the courage to enter into the conversation with our Christian brothers and sisters. We will find that many of them are well acquainted with the good parts and can be our partners in the struggle for a more just world. Others, we may have to reacquaint them with the good parts of their tradition. We live in a time when the support of war is equated with loving God and country. Hating gays is equated with following the Bible. In Parker's day, slave owners used the Bible to justify their position. Listen to Parker's response in a letter to a slave owner. You seem to think that the Old Testament and the New Testament are just alike, that Christianity and Judaism are therefore the same. So as a Christian, you appeal to the Old Testament for your authority to hold slaves. Now look a little at the matter and see the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament demands circumcisions, a peculiar priesthood, sacrifice of certain animals, observances of certain fast days, full moon days, new moon days, the seventh day, and the like. It demands them all in the name of the Lord. Yet you do not observe any of them. Now you say, I suppose, that the ritual laws of the Old Testament came from God, were repealed by Christ, who also spoke by the command of God. If that were so, then it would appear that God repealed his own commands. You say God does not change. So I say, I do not think God makes laws and changes them. But if the Bible, as you say, as a whole is the Word of God, then it is plain that in the New Testament he takes back what he commands in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, man is allowed to put away his wife for any cause, or none at all. But you know, Christ said Moses gave that command on account of the hardness of men's hearts. In Exodus 35:2-3, it is forbidden to kindle a fire on Saturday, Sabbath, on the pain of death. In Numbers 15:32-36, it is said that the Lord commanded a man to be stoned to death because he picked up sticks on Saturday. Yet, I suppose you have a fire in your house on Saturday. And Sunday too, and perhaps would not think it wicked to bring in an armful of wood to make a fire on either of those days. No, I do not think that God changes. Therefore, I don't believe he uttered those dreadful commandments in the Old Testament. I believe that God has the attributes of universal justice and universal love. Doubtless, you will call me an infidel, but that makes no odds. I try to be a Christian, but do not begin by discarding conscience, reason, and common sense. We need not discard conscience, reason, and common sense. In fact, these are the hallmarks of our faith. If all Unitarian Universalists retain of Christianity is to love our neighbors as ourselves and to love our enemies, then I say that we have retained the best part. We must confront the ideas that stand in the name of Christianity, yet stand in the way of love. We must also stand against those who believe war is the way to peace. Parker said, "War is an utter violation of Christianity. If war be right, then Christianity is wrong, false, and a lie. Every man who understands Christianity knows that war is wrong. War is treason to the people, to mankind, and to God." Parker defined democracy as a government of all the people, by all the people, for all the people. When Lincoln used this phrase in the Gettysburg Address, he was quoting Parker, and everybody listening knew that he was quoting Parker. This is the definition that we need to reclaim. The people. Us. What is our relationship to the corporations that influence our government? What is our relationship to the media that fans the flame of war? What do we do to make this a government of the people, by the people, and for the people? How do we hold it accountable? I get lots of emails about issues, and it's easy to forward them along to my representative or to sign the petition on the bottom. But that's too easy. I hear they pay more attention if I make a phone call. But even that's too easy. I hear they pay even more attention if I sit down with pen and paper and a stamp and say, "You represent me. This is my opinion." We express our opinions in letters to the editors, and I enjoy the wild debate that our paper has. They really do make an effort to allow divergent and crazy opinions, so that would mean our crazy opinions as well. We are also in a position to influence our neighbors. Tell them that you attend a church that is open to gays and lesbians. They're on the board, they're teaching RE, and the walls haven't fallen in. Tell them that you believe that love is better than hate. Remind them that Jesus commanded them to love their enemies. Remind them that Jesus did not advocate the torture of prisoners. Ask them, who would Jesus bomb? But more important, much more important than these attempts at clever repartee, love them. They are your neighbors. They are the people at the store. They are your co-workers. Love them, as hard as that might be. That is the hardest thing about our religion, the inherent worth and dignity of people who we believe are complete idiots. You know, they say this is an easy religion because you have so much freedom in what you believe. But the catch is you have to allow others that freedom. Love them. They are strident and dogmatic because they are afraid. They are afraid of terrorists and thus afraid to question our leaders. They are afraid sometimes of dissent. Remind them that debate has always been part of our democracy. They are afraid of their family falling apart. All of us share that fear. but we need to focus on solutions that encourage communication, loving, tolerance, and forgiveness instead of scapegoating villains. Love should overcome fear. They fear being punished by their God. Let them know that you have not been struck by lightning. Remind them that their Christ, the Jesus of Christians that are in this congregation, that said that we are forgiven to the degree that we forgive others. I do not know whether this principle is governed by God, Hindu karma, or human sociology, but it's what we have. The love we give to the world is our salvation. We cannot shrink from the evil of this world, nor can we return evil for evil. We must face it with the courage of our convictions. We must actively promote loving kindness in our family, our town, our country, and our world. As you use, we need to look for those values that allow this congregation of Christians and Jews and atheists and pagans and Buddhists to sit side by side and honor and love each other. We do something here quite by accident. We're operating on some implicit notions that we should care, that we shouldn't let religion separate one from another, that we do not need to think alike to love alike. In the response time, I want us to speak and identify those values that undergird our actions. I look at the people in this congregation and I know the good work that you do as physicians, as social workers, as teachers, as political activists, as people working in charities. I know that. We need to be able to talk about why we do these things. We know that we don't do it to receive an award in heaven, and we know that we don't do it to avoid hell. But do we know why we do these things? And until we're able to articulate that, people won't know our values. And if they don't know our values, they'll think we have none. But we know different. I open the floor to you.
Well, Theodore Parker is one of my favorite people, and one of the quotations that has given me great hope in the last month or so is the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But I'm sitting here thinking, as you're talking about, using a commonality of religious ideas to try and have conversations with people, and something inside of me is shouting, "You're dead wrong." And the reason is this is not about religion. This is about power. This is a political struggle. The same values that Osama bin Laden and Jerry Falwell are using are exactly the same. And they are appealing, using a prostituted version of religion to gain power. And you can talk and you can use the Bible, you can use the Quran to counter their principles or whatever they're putting forth, it isn't going to change a thing, because they'll be like chameleons, and they'll mutate to something else. It is simply a political struggle. It has nothing to do with religion.
Charlie, some years ago I read an author who wrote, it was John Gardner, and he wrote, "We may not know whether our efforts," I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "We may not know whether our efforts will add one increment to the dignity of human life in this world, but it is our business as human beings to try." This is why I work in the community.
It's a faith statement. Yeah.
Charlie, the recent election and all this other stuff has given me at least some way to communicate with the other side, where we want to put it. I work deep in Stokes County every day, or 3 days a week, and surrounded by these people. And at least it's been able to say to me that I am mad that somebody has stolen Christianity's basic tenets, such as, they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, what Christian would start a war?" And they go, "Oh, you know, and what Christian would give to the rich and not the poor?" And they go, "Oh." And so it's giving me something to say at least. So maybe something good about this. That we do have some of this.
Yeah, one thing I've found my whole life is that if you come from a sort of a, whether implicit or explicit, sort of paternalistic attitude, or maternalistic or whatever, that's an idiot, and I'm going to hold that in reserve. They can tell you things that they're an idiot. You know, I think that part of the work that has to be done is to just realize that even if you disagree, that to come at somebody as if you are right and they are wrong, and there's no interchange, that you're not willing to listen to them on their ground, they're not going to listen to you on yours, and that's just the way it is.
And that's the caution, to love them. You're not, whether you change them or not, the loving them is what keeps you from just being sucked up by the whole conflict.
Just a small example of that. Mandy's current best friend is a daughter of the minister at Grace Bible Church, which is just down the road from here, and teaches the Bible as the Word of God. And they're in our neighborhood and close. And it's been really interesting to, for instance, last week when I took the two of them on a trek to get a Christmas tree, but we're in the car for 45 minutes to an hour, and they're talking to each other about beliefs, and I'm trying to facilitate a respectful dialogue. So, and just one further example, tonight Mandy and I are going to Grace Bible Church for the service that they have tonight, simply because we've been asked, and we're going as friends, and because I want to demonstrate that we can go and be respectful and still not share those same beliefs.
Well, I speak with a lot of mixed emotions after hearing Geraldine put it out so bluntly, and Jim also speaking. And you're touching on a topic that walks that thin line between religious theology and some of the actions we should take in that area versus the political realm. And I think it's important for us as a congregation to realize that even if, as much as it's tempting, we have to avoid getting close to using the political realm as that dividing line in the same way we do as our faith. Theologically, we have to decide what we have to do and how we have to behave, and we have to confront people that would lead us as a state into political situations we wouldn't like or that we fear. But I really hesitate using this veiled discussion of making it Republican Democrat, because in our congregation we have a lot of people that vote on both sides of the aisle for good reasons and important concerns. And in the spirit of openness, I want to just state that veiled line that we walk sometimes in theology discussions and political ones has to be stated openly, that some of us may be strongly on one side or not, but we have to be conscious that our actions must stem from a religious and theological basis and have that validity too, as much as we are in the fray on the political side as well.
About 3 weeks ago, I was waiting for Ben to come out of choir practice, and I was talking with a woman who turns out to have, in the past, been a Catholic nun who left their orders and got married and has children and very firmly believes in creationism and God and all that. And so we talked. I mean, we went back and forth about things, and not in anger, but just really trying to explain why we believed as we believed on those issues, gay rights, and oh, I fear for the children, and my reasons why. Why are the children, why should you be afraid for the children in gay families? So we just went back and forth and back and forth. Well, she has seen me a couple times since then at different choir functions for Ben's choir, and she kind of has been, I feel like, avoiding me, because I would see her and I'd nod and, say hi. I'd nod and say hi. But I wasn't like approaching her, and she wasn't coming over to me. Last night at Ben's concert, she came over and said, "Didn't the kids do beautifully?" I said, "They really did." She said, "Your son is really good." And it occurred to me, she clearly knows that what I believe. She clearly knows that I don't believe as she does. But she is talking to me. And that's what it takes. It takes putting it out there, the possibility of rejection, the possibility that she might say something to some of the other choir parents and they might be a little leery of Ben and me because we don't believe that way. But that's not what happens. What is happening is if you are willing to get up and talk about it, don't shy away from the elephant, in the living room, get up and talk about it, be respectful. I mean, I go to the forum and I'm very fiery liberal and all this stuff, but I hug the Republicans when I walk out. because that's what it takes. It takes the dialogue. And why do we do what we do? I believe it's because we believe in the dialogue. We believe in the sharing of the ideas. And out of that struggle, out of that mix comes something we can live with.
Thank you. Let us now join in singing an old abolition hymn, number 150, All Whose Boast It Is.